The woman who stepped out of the luxury car drew everyone's attention as she walked straight towards me. She then said, "I've come to pick you up in your car," and stood close to me, which caused a big stir around us. Joseph's mouth was agape. Who is that woman?" It wasn't me who answered Joseph's question, but the stunning model-like beauty, Jessica. "My name is Stephen, and I'm 30 years old. I work at a design and engineering company. Today is our high school reunion. It's the first time we've ever had one, but out of nowhere, an invitation had arrived. The sender was Joseph. We met in our first year of high school and pushed each other to aim for a prestigious university. We spent our afternoons studying in the library or study rooms, half studying and half chatting. Joseph and I especially loved cars and often debated about our dream cars. However, we went separate ways in our second year of high school. My father suddenly passed away due to illness. Although I could have tried to apply for university with scholarships, I decided to start working to support my struggling mother, so I got permission from the school to get a part-time job. The part-time job was at the design and engineering company where I now work, and I found the work there very interesting. During high school, they only let me do simple tasks, tracing someone else's designs or doing basic measurements. Eager to become fully competent, I decided to join the company full-time right after high school instead of going to college. When I told Joseph about this, he was upset. He said we had promised to apply for T University together. But my situation had changed drastically. Since then, I haven't been in touch with Joseph at all. I know he successfully got into the prestigious university we aimed for. It's been 12 years since then. I was genuinely curious about how he's been, so I decided to attend the reunion. Since the invitation was from Joseph, it seemed he was the organizer. I arrived early at the venue and looked for Joseph. I found him right away. Even in high school, he was tall, well-built, and handsome with sharp features. Today, he was wearing an expensive-looking suit, looking even more impressive. As I approached Joseph, he noticed me. "Hey, it's Stephen, isn't it?" He walked towards me with wide eyes. "Joseph. Long time no see. How have you been?" I greeted him as I handed over the participation fee, and he nodded with a smile. "I've been well, but really busy. The company I joined after graduating is extremely demanding. But, how should I put it? I feel like I'm really contributing to the country, and it's very fulfilling." Contributing to the country, that's quite grand. He works for a famous company that everyone knows. That's impressive, graduating from such a prestigious university and working at a top company. When I said that, Joseph puffed out his chest a little. "Yeah, I'm doing my best. You are a high school graduate, right? I heard your dad passed away suddenly, that's tough. Such a waste of your talent." I smiled wryly. "I'm doing my best at my current company too. But I'm sure my efforts seem small compared to Joseph's." I didn't say much and changed the subject. "By the way, we used to talk a lot about cars back in the day. You always wanted a foreign car." When I mentioned this, Joseph's face lit up. "Oh. You have to hear this. I finally got my dream car." It was the European car brand that Joseph had always admired the most. Excitedly, he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture. "Look at this. The luxury and dignity of this style. Isn't it amazing? You can't help but fall in love with it." I nodded as I looked at the phone. I prefer domestic cars, but the overwhelming presence of foreign cars is undeniably impressive. But, the maintenance costs are really high. I don't feel comfortable taking it to just any shop for inspections. So I end up going to the manufacturer, which is expensive. And repairs. With foreign cars, sometimes the parts are discontinued. So getting original parts can be tough. It seems like he had hit his stride. Maybe the challenges of maintaining it are part of the appeal. Just then, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "It's someone from work, so I need to take this," I said to Joseph and answered the call. "Someone from work? Hey, it's your day off, right? Are you working for a sweatshop or something?" he teased. "Hello?" I ignored Joseph and took the call, but Jessica was silent. "Hello? Can you hear me? What's up? Puzzled by the lack of response, I spoke again. In the background, more classmates had arrived, and Joseph continued bragging about his car. Are you enjoying the reunion? Jessica finally broke the silence. Well, to be honest, not really. I admitted. I had come to talk to Joseph, but after just a bit of conversation, I was already exhausted. He probably didn't mean any harm, but all he talked about were his achievements. I'm sure he worked incredibly hard to get into that prestigious university, and his current job at a major company is demanding. His salary is probably high. And he owns a car that everyone dreams of. For a moment, I silently watched Joseph, who had changed a bit. Then Jessica said, "All right, I'll come pick you up," and hung up. What? I stared at my phone in disbelief. Why did Jessica call me in the first place? While I was puzzled, Joseph spoke to me again. Sorry, I've been talking about myself. What car are you driving now? I replied that I drive a domestic car. Joseph continued, compact cars have low maintenance costs, right? What kind are you driving? Show me. I think sporty-looking wagon types are nice, even if they're just compact cars. I sighed. Joseph, what's happened to you? I furrowed my brows and looked at him, making him uneasy. Sure, your car is cool. But every car has its own appeal. I prefer domestically made cars. When I said that, Joseph scratched his head awkwardly. Sorry, I was actually really looking forward to seeing you. Stephen, seeing you brought back all those high school memories. I felt betrayed when you didn't go to the T University with me, even though I understand why. I thought if you had come with me, you could have had a car like this too. I sighed. I'm sorry too. Maybe if I had explained things better back then, you wouldn't have felt that way. I found the work at the company where I had my part-time job really interesting and wanted to learn through practice instead of just studying. And after that, as I trailed off, a high-end domestic car pulled up outside the venue. That alone caused a bit of a stir, but when everyone saw the woman stepping out of the driver's seat, they were stunned. With a small face, thin lips, a sharp high nose, and almond-shaped double eyelids. Her slightly brown, wavy hair. Her well-proportioned figure, and long, slender legs peeking out from her skirt. The woman who stepped out of the luxury car drew everyone's attention as she walked straight towards me and said, "I've come to pick you up in your car," causing a huge commotion around us. Joseph's mouth was agape. Who is that woman? It wasn't me who answered Joseph's question, but the stunning model-like beauty, Jessica. My name is Jessica. I'm Stephen's assistant, she said, making a graceful bow. I held my head in my hands. Jessica took my hand and, insisting, "Let's go," tried to lead me back the way she came. Jessica, sorry. I just started to enjoy myself, I said, stopping her. Jessica widened her eyes. Just had a misunderstanding with an old friend. We just made up, so, sorry, I explained. Jessica smiled warmly. It's fine if you're having fun. Can I hang around and wait? If I wasn't enjoying myself, it would be rude to keep her waiting after she came to pick me up. I was about to suggest she head back when Joseph stepped forward. If you'd like, your assistant can join us. Jessica's face lit up. Really? Her smile was dazzling, nearly knocking everyone out. It's a buffet, so if you pay the fee, Joseph said, glancing at me with a grin. I silently took out my wallet and paid for Jessica. You are not really my assistant, and that car is a company car, I said as I handed over the fee. Jessica pouted. Hey, I was trying to make you look good. I chuckled. Jessica continued. Why not? You're going to be the next president. When you become president, I'll be your assistant, and you'll use that car. The room buzzed at her words. People started asking about my current situation. So I reluctantly explained that I had been working hard at the company where I had my high school part-time job, eventually being considered for the next president role. Jessica looked at me with a sly smile, but I tried not to involve her too much in my story. Joseph then said, I see, you were working hard too, Stephen. Sorry again for everything. No worries. I wanted to tell you everything back then. After we fell out in high school, I was a bit stubborn. Perhaps, can we hang out more often? Joseph nodded with a smile. As the reunion ended, I went for a drive with Jessica behind the wheel. She focused straight ahead, concentrating on driving. Watching her profile, I recalled how we met. I met Jessica in my second year of high school. It was a few months after I started my part-time job at the company, during the summer. During the summer vacation, a fourth-grade girl began coming to the office. It was Jessica, the daughter of Mr. Brown, the company president. Back then, the company was very small and family-like, and employees' children would often come by on days off. Jessica was there almost every day. She seemed to enjoy watching the adults work. She took a particular liking to me. She would watch me work closely. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. A 10-year-old girl hanging around didn't seem like anything romantic. But Jessica was quite a mature girl. She would straightforwardly say, "I want to marry you in the future." When I brushed it off, she would get angry, saying, "I'm serious." The employees teased me, saying, "You'll marry the president's daughter and become the next president," which made a high school kid like me feel a bit awkward. However, when I graduated from high school and officially joined the company as a full-time employee, things changed. I convinced Mr. Brown, the president, to implement 3D CAD. I taught myself 3D modeling and incorporated it into our design and engineering projects, which increased our clients. As the company grew, it became harder for children to come and go, and I stopped seeing Jessica around that time. Self-study was incredibly challenging, but I enjoyed every bit of it. I loved that kind of learning. Around this time, my desire to go to college, which I had once given up, rekindled. Of course, I kept that desire in check because I was already working. But I wondered if I could at least take some classes to learn about the areas where self-study had its limits. Going to college now seemed impractical. Still, I wanted to attend university. One day, amidst this internal struggle, Mr. Brown approached me. "Stephen, have you considered going to college?" I was stunned when Mr. Brown, the president, said, "Thanks to your hard work, the company has grown significantly. I know you've been looking into universities because you want to study more. How about taking a leave of absence and attending college for 4 years? I want to support your aspirations," he said with a warm smile. I was moved to tears. I asked for some time to think it over. It was an incredibly generous offer, but I didn't want to leave the company short-handed for 4 years. After doing some research, I found a night school at a university. Fortunately, there was a night school within commuting distance that had the program I wanted to study. When I consulted with Mr. Brown, he laughed at my modesty. So, I enrolled in night school and studied to my heart's content. During this time, the company accommodated my schedule by adjusting overtime and weekend work, which was a huge help. I will definitely repay this kindness. With that determination, I continued to work hard after graduating from university. I actively incorporated the new skills I had learned at university into my work. These new skills were particularly effective in large projects, allowing us to offer proposals from various angles, even in urban development. So, as it turns out, I'm not just a high school graduate as Joseph mentioned. I forgot to explain this to Joseph, but I'm sure we'll have another chance to meet. One day, while I was busy applying my learned skills and helping the employees acquire them, Mr. Brown invited me to dinner. Mr. Brown had treated me like his own son since high school. We often had meals together, discussing various topics each time. I thought it was just another usual dinner that day. But when I arrived at the restaurant, there was someone else at the table besides Mr. Brown. It was Jessica, all grown up. Seeing me, she blushed and looked down. She had transformed from an assertive elementary school girl into a composed and stunningly beautiful young woman, and I hesitated to approach her. When I cautiously approached the table, Mr. Brown gestured for me to sit. I still vividly remember nodding nervously when he asked if I remembered his daughter. When I nodded, Jessica's face lit up like a blooming flower. Despite the initial tension, the dinner progressed pleasantly. Mr. Brown kept glancing at Jessica, and each time she would look down, until finally, "Dad, she said hesitantly. With a knowing smile, Mr. Brown excused himself to the restroom, leaving us alone. The tension between us increased. "I've wanted to see you for so long." Hearing those words from the now beautiful Jessica made my heart leap. "Do you remember when I was in elementary school? I asked you to marry me? She looked up at me with a flushed face and pleading eyes. I nodded awkwardly, like a robot. Jessica took a deep breath and said the words she had prepared. I've loved you even when we couldn't see each other. Will you date me with marriage in mind? The words, spoken rapidly as if exhaling a long-held breath, pierced my heart. I met Jessica when she was still in elementary school. During my sensitive middle and high school years, while others were developing crushes on classmates or teachers, she had carefully nurtured the feelings she had since she was 10. I was deeply moved by that. She had kept her desire to see me suppressed all these years. She had heard about my hard work at the company and decided not to interfere. She had promised her father, Mr. Brown, to focus on her studies until she graduated from university. She worked hard to improve herself, worrying that I might marry someone else in the meantime. Once she was close to graduating and had a job offer from her father's company, she finally arranged to meet me today. Hearing this, I couldn't dismiss her feelings. When Mr. Brown returned from the restroom and said, I'd feel at ease if it were you, Stephen, with a warm smile, I made up my mind. Definitely, I'd love to date you. Jessica, whose long-held feelings had finally been acknowledged, blushed deeply and shed tears. I knew I had to honor her sincere feelings. I made up my mind to do just that. As we drove, reminiscing about the past, these memories became precious parts of my life. I wondered if I was good enough to deserve Jessica's genuine feelings. Looking at her profile, I said, Can we take a break, indicating the parking lot of a nearby park? Of course. I replied, and the car slowly pulled into the parking lot. It was a fairly large park, with a central area full of large playground equipment and a walking path around it. At the end of the path was a small hill with a gazebo. Jessica and I began walking toward the gazebo. The stars, they're beautiful, she said. Looking up, I saw a sky full of stars. Maybe it was because we were in a place with few streetlights or because of the clear winter air, there seemed to be more stars than usual. Yeah, they're beautiful. I responded, and Jessica chuckled. Her face seemed to shine more than usual. I love you, Jessica. As I looked at Jessica's profile, I couldn't help but murmur those words. Jessica blushed deeply. What? All of a sudden. I'm happy, though. I laughed softly. Well, I was just reminiscing, and I wondered if I was good enough to deserve your sincere feelings. It made me realize I hadn't expressed even half of what I feel. I'm not very good at romance. After graduating high school, I worked tirelessly. While attending night school, time flew by like a storm. During that time, I had no romantic interests and was entirely focused on work. And once I start working, I get completely absorbed. I'm probably the most boring guy ever. Could someone like Jessica, who was 7 years younger than me, really be satisfied with a guy like me? A dull man like me with a beautiful woman who attracts everyone's attention. I don't think we match. Still, I don't want to let Jessica go. I'm afraid you'll realize someday that there are better guys out there. Jessica's face lit up. No way. Stephen, you really thought that? She looked incredibly happy for some reason. I had just confessed my insecurities, feeling completely pathetic. What are you worried about? I've only ever loved you since I was 10. Jessica looked at me as if waiting desperately for my response. Well, that's just it. There are so many great guys out there, but you only see me. I'm really happy, but, for example, Joseph. The guy I talked about today. He's smart, works at a big company, drives a foreign car, is tall and good-looking, he's better than me in every way. Someone as beautiful, kind, and cheerful as you would be a great match for a guy like him. I knew I was being self-deprecating. I thought Jessica might be disappointed, but she widened her eyes in surprise. Wow, Stephen, you really have low self-esteem. I didn't know that. I tilted my head in confusion. Well then, let me tell you how exceptional and wonderful you are. Jessica said with a chuckle, raising her index finger. First of all, you're incredibly hardworking. The reason our company has grown so much is entirely thanks to you. My father talks about it all the time. Her words made me feel a bit embarrassed. Secondly, you're really smart. You could have gone to University if you had wanted to. I tried to be modest, but my mock exam results in my first year of high school did show I was within reach. Jessica continued to list my good qualities until I blushed and told her to stop. Stop. That's enough, I said, my face was turning red. Honestly, I was thrilled. It felt great to know Jessica saw me in such a positive light. Jessica looked dissatisfied but said, "Okay, then, just one more thing." She gazed at me intently. "The reason I fell in love with you was seeing your serious expression as you expertly controlled the mouse and keyboard to create designs on the computer. It looked like magic, and I fell for you." I was a bit surprised to learn that young Jessica was drawn to such a seemingly mundane aspect of me. If Joseph is like a foreign car, then you're like a domestic car. I was puzzled by this analogy. You're gentle and kind, which makes you more wonderful than someone flashy like Joseph. At that moment, I decided there was no time like the present. I took out the box I always carried in my pocket. Jessica looked surprised. "Thank you for understanding me better than I do myself." "Jessica, you're beautiful, you work hard to stay fit, and you're kind and strong inside. To me, you're the perfect woman." Jessica listened without moving. "Honestly, I sometimes feel like I'm not worthy enough for you. But I don't want to lose you to anyone else. I want to be by your side forever. Will you marry me?" When our relationship started, it was Jessica who took the courage to confess her feelings. She had loved me for years. I always knew I wanted to propose to her myself. How long had I been carrying this ring? It was just an ordinary day when I was wandering around the city alone. The moment I realized I wanted to marry Jessica, my feet unconsciously led me into a jewelry store. As I looked at the sparkling rings, I found one that would look perfect on Jessica and bought it. I carried that ring with me everywhere, so that I could propose at any moment. It's embarrassing, isn't it? I have always wanted to marry you, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Eventually, I started feeling insecure, thinking there might be better men out there for you. I'm glad that I finally decided to propose before anyone else could take you away," I said, holding out the box with the ring. I was anxious that she might not take it, but, "Really, are you sure I'm good enough?" she asked, making me almost stumble. "What? Now you're the one who's worried?" "Why?" I asked, flustered. Jessica looked down. "Because, my confession, I asked my father for help." I understood what she was trying to say. "It has nothing to do with Mr. Brown. I genuinely love you." This was something I could say with absolute confidence. Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes. Then, she gently took the small box from my hand. Jessica slowly opened the small box and, upon seeing its contents, murmured, "Wow, it's beautiful." It's not just about the price, but I splurged quite a bit to honor Jessica's long-held feelings. I couldn't imagine any ring other than this one, which perfectly matched Jessica's image. She gazed at the ring intently and slowly took it out. And then, "Here." She handed the ring to me. I took it and placed it on her finger. She held up her left hand, with the ring now glittering on her ring finger, against the starry sky. "I'm so happy, it's so beautiful, even more beautiful than this starry sky." In that moment, she looked more beautiful than ever. Just as foreign cars and domestic cars each have their own unique appeal, I realized I had qualities I hadn't acknowledged. Jessica had discovered those qualities in me. Although Jessica is undeniably a beautiful and charming woman, I believe I know her inner beauty better than anyone. I hope to cherish what I have now and continue to improve in areas where I am lacking. I want to further enrich my work life and eventually acquire the car I've always dreamed of. And most importantly, I want to live happily with Jessica. I have many dreams, and sometimes I worry if I can achieve them all. But with Jessica by my side, I believe we can achieve any dream eventually. Looking up at the star-filled sky, Jessica and I gently held hands. Even though I tried to get details from the Vietnamese man, he didn't understand my Japanese because he was anxious. When he finally started speaking, I couldn't understand him. Time passed frustratingly, and Sarah sighed. "This is problematic. We need to get the details quickly before his memory fades. But getting an interpreter now will take time. Is there no other way?" Sarah sighed again and glanced at me. Seeing her pleading eyes, I made up my mind. My name is Michael. I'm 30 years old. Currently, I work as a paralegal, assisting attorneys at a law firm. I've been through a lot to get here. I've also given up on some dreams. However, I think I'm living the most peaceful life now. The documents you requested are ready. When I handed the documents to the male attorney, John, he glanced at them and said, "Thanks. I'll look at them later," and turned back to his computer. But, hey, you borrowed my paralegal, and that's all you have to say? Take a proper look at his work, said Sarah, showing her strong-willed attitude. Sarah is the attorney I work for. Although I primarily work for Sarah, I occasionally help other attorneys like this. John quickly flipped through my documents and praised them for being well done. Of course. Michael is amazing. Sarah complimented me as usual. Since obtaining her lawyer qualification at 24, Sarah has made remarkable achievements and now handles requests from various places as a highly skilled attorney. Despite being such an impressive person, she somehow appreciates me. When I first came to this office for an interview, it was the same. As soon as she saw me, Sarah greeted me with a big smile and conducted the interview with the principal and me. They were looking for a new paralegal because Sarah's former paralegal had passed the bar exam and left. They asked about my background and gave me a brief legal test. It was a very simple test. I was hired on the spot. Honestly, I was confused if I was the right fit, but Sarah smiled and said, "Looking forward to working with you." I can't thank Sarah enough. Since then, Sarah has praised me even for small things, saying, "Well done," or "Amazing." To be honest, I'm currently lacking confidence, so I can't fully accept her compliments. Every time I'm praised, I let out an awkward laugh. At first, it felt like having a very kind older sister, but after working here for 3 months and spending time with Sarah, I've fallen for her. When she smiles at me, my heart races. However, a highly skilled attorney and a mere assistant paralegal. It's like comparing apples and oranges. My feelings for her are my motivation to live, but I try my best to keep them hidden. One day, Sarah was assigned as a public defender. The client was a foreigner with Vietnamese nationality, who as a technical intern, could speak some Japanese. In that case, there's no problem. Let's go. Sarah quickly prepared and left the office briskly. I hurriedly followed her. While moving, we checked the details of the case. Oh, this is... I was speechless. We need to push for a reduced sentence somehow. Sarah frowned as well. The Vietnamese client had been involved in a type of fraud. He had withdrawn cash using someone else's card as a so-called runner. In recent years, special fraud cases have been increasing, often leading to harsher sentences for fraud and theft. Depending on the scale, even first-time offenders often face jail time, making this a challenging case. The Vietnamese man we met was named Nguyen. As soon as he met Sarah, he kept repeating, "I didn't know it was a crime." Even though we tried to get details from him, he couldn't understand our Japanese due to his anxiety. When he finally understood and spoke, we couldn't understand him. Time passed frustratingly, and Sarah sighed. This is problematic. We need to get the details quickly before his memory fades. But getting an interpreter now will take time. Is there no other way? Sarah sighed again and glanced at me. Seeing her pleading eyes, I made up my mind. I spoke to Nguyen in Vietnamese. Nguyen looked surprised for a moment, but then his eyes lit up and he started speaking rapidly. I had to ask him to slow down as I couldn't understand him when he spoke too fast. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. I didn't want anyone to hear my broken Vietnamese, but this wasn't the time to be picky. I continued to converse with Nguyen in Vietnamese. Nguyen's story was pitiful. Life in his home country was tough, so he learned Japanese and came to Japan as a technical intern. However, his internship site wasn't doing well, and he had almost no money left after living expenses and sending money home. At that time, someone told him about an easy part-time job. He was just supposed to withdraw cash using a card handed to him by that person. When he asked why, he was told it was to help an elderly person who had difficulty moving. He believed the story. He even thought he was helping someone. He withdrew the cash and handed it over, feeling proud. He was a bit disappointed when he was told if a foreigner hands over the money, the elderly might get startled. So I'll do it later, as he wanted to see the elderly person's happy face. But he was pleased, thinking he had helped someone. However, the few $100s he received as payment was from the cash he had just withdrawn. Although he found it strange, he was so excited about getting money so easily that he ignored the doubt. As a result, he was identified by the ATM's security camera and arrested by the police. Ugwin kept repeating, "I didn't know anything." He probably was telling the truth. I clenched my fists. I was trembling with anger. Ugwin was a victim too. However, even if he didn't know, it was still theft. There's no such thing as an easy job where you get hundreds of dollars just for withdrawing money. When I explained this, he slumped down. Then, worried about the elderly person, he tearfully apologized. He had withdrawn $10,000. After that, he lost contact with the Japanese person who had hired him. Although we finally got the details and understood the situation, it didn't change the fact that it was a difficult case. After the meeting, we returned to the office. On the way, Sarah looked at me intently. "I didn't know you could speak Vietnamese. I thought you only spoke English." Hearing this, I furrowed my brow. "Ha? I never said I could speak English. I didn't even tell Ryan." When I stammered, Sarah sighed. Never mind then." Her confusing words made me furrow my brow even more. "Actually, your grandmother asked me to." "What?" I widened my eyes in surprise. "Indeed, I am currently living with my grandmother." "What did she ask? From where?" As I was bewildered, Sarah smiled. "To explain that, you'll need to tell me about your past, Michael, who graduated from Stanford University and holds a California bar license." I widened my eyes even more. How much did she know about me? I felt a bit scared, but Sarah kept smiling. Encouraged by her compassionate gaze, I began to speak hesitantly. Due to my parents' work, I've been living abroad since the 3rd grade. I spent 3 years in Vietnam, and then, after my parents were promoted, we moved to the US. While living in the US, I developed a dream. I wanted to become a lawyer and help those in weaker positions. In a country with many immigrants like the US, there are numerous issues of all sizes. I wanted to help the people of Japan where I was born, and the people of Vietnam where I spent 3 years. With that dream, I studied diligently every day. To stand by the weak, I had to be strong. After entering Stanford University, I went on to Stanford Law School and obtained a California bar license. However, the big hurdle was the quotas. Initially, I couldn't get my own cases and had to rely on senior lawyers to meet my quotas. While there were many cases due to the litigious nature of the US, I couldn't afford to take my time with each one. I began to prioritize efficiency to meet the quotas, becoming increasingly focused on it. Then, a turning point came. I thought it was a winnable case. However, the opposing side's research surpassed mine. They exploited weaknesses I hadn't noticed, and we lost the case. The client was furious and fired me as their lawyer. I was furious with myself as well. If I had approached the case more carefully, I would have noticed and addressed the weak points. In my quest for efficiency and my overconfidence in winning, I had forgotten the most important thing. Realizing this, I judged that I was not suited to be a lawyer. Rather than helping the weak, I had neglected them. This was not the job I had dreamed of. In my exhaustion, I received a letter. It was from my grandmother. Hearing about my situation from my parents, she sent me a letter from Japan. "Come back anytime." Seeing those words made my heart tremble. The neat, careful handwriting made me naturally shed tears. "And then? I want to go back to Japan," I murmured. My memories of Japan were up to 3rd grade and the annual visits. While my maternal grandparents had already passed away, my paternal grandmother always welcomed us with a smile. She was always warm and welcoming. I wanted to go back to that place. So, I returned to Japan alone and started living with my grandmother. For the first few months after returning, I spent my time in a daze. I spent my days eating the delicious meals my grandmother prepared, sitting on the porch reading books while looking at the flowers in the garden. And sometimes helping her with gardening. Every flower my grandmother grew was vibrant and blooming beautifully, filled with love and care. She often called this my recharging period, and surrounded by flowers, I truly felt warmth, peace, and a sense of fulfillment growing inside me. As my health gradually improved, I considered starting a part-time job and began reading a local job listing magazine when my grandmother handed me her mobile phone. Despite being 80 years old, my grandmother loves new gadgets and skillfully used her mobile phone. She showed me a job listing for a law firm.
Grandma. I mean, right now. I'm not really up for anything related to law.
As I hesitated and tried to decline, my grandmother smiled and pointed to the word paralegal on the screen.
Of course, I knew what it meant.
During my time as a lawyer in the US, I had been helped by paralegals many times.
I think you're suited for something related to law, Michael. Hearing that, I reluctantly took the phone from her and looked at the job listing.
A paralegal, assisting lawyers. I had often delegated preliminary investigations to paralegals for the sake of efficiency.
If their investigation was insufficient, even a winnable case could be lost. I knew better than anyone the importance of this job. If I focused on conducting thorough investigations as a paralegal, would my past mistakes eventually be forgiven?
As I pondered this hopeful thought while looking at the job listings, my grandmother peeked over my shoulder and tapped on a specific law firm ad,
saying, "This one looks good, doesn't it?"
"Nothing ventured, nothing gained," she said as she pressed the apply button.
"Wait, what?"
"Hang on."
As I panicked, my grandmother smiled and said, "It's fine.
Look here, it says they welcome people who do thorough investigations."
"It's perfect for you, Michael."
I stared at the screen.
Indeed, it matched my motto.
My grandmother smiled contentedly.
"Why don't you at least try the interview?
It might open up a new path for you," she said casually. In the end, I searched for the law firm on my phone and applied myself.
I thought my grandmother had randomly picked one of the many law firms.
It was the firm where I currently work.
Wait, was I set up?
After finishing my story, I looked at Sarah, who was smiling broadly.
"Maybe so," she said, clearly amused. "Actually, my parents' house is 2 doors down from your grandmother's. I live alone now, though."
Her words took me by complete surprise.
"What?"
Sarah seemed pleased by my astonished reaction and laughed softly. "My parents were busy, and from around upper elementary school, they decided I could manage on my own, so I often ate dinner alone."
Sarah's expression turned slightly sad.
She mentioned that in lower elementary, her parents would come home earlier, but during long breaks like summer vacation,
she would have packed lunches prepared and spend the days alone.
Although she had some friends' moms checking on her occasionally, she couldn't impose on them too often. As she got used to being alone, she spent her time watching TV and studying. During that time, she got to know my grandmother. Your grandmother said she was lonely because her son's family had moved overseas and she couldn't see them often. So, I started having meals at her place sometimes and we became close.
I had never heard this story. That's why I know a lot about you, Michael. Like how you wet the bed again when you suddenly moved to a new environment. She brought up my most embarrassing past and I panicked. "Wait. Grandma, why did she tell you that?"
Seeing me shout in embarrassment, Sarah laughed joyfully. "Whenever I visit my parents, I always drop by your grandmother's house."
She would happily talk about how you went to Stanford University, went to law school, and became a lawyer.
She said it's great because I became a lawyer in Japan, too. However, it seems that as time went on, my grandmother began to express more concerns about me. It was around the time I started struggling between my ideals and reality.
And finally, I returned to Japan.
I told your grandmother to let me know if there was anything I could do.
She asked me to help you once you started to recover a bit. So, I waited for that moment. As I began to regain some stability, Sarah got Ryan to post a job listing for me.
Actually, my paralegal quit a while ago, and Ryan kept asking if I needed to hire someone.
But I delayed it a bit.
She had thought of me, who returned to Japan in despair. She told my grandmother about the perfectly timed job listing, and my grandmother casually suggested the position to me, saying, "How about this one?" and tapping the apply button. I had been perfectly guided into applying to the law firm where Sarah worked.
Wow! I was played like a fiddle. This is embarrassing.
I covered my face with my hands, feeling ashamed. But Sarah let out a soft laugh. Your grandmother thought about how to handle it for a long time. She worried that if she said she knew someone there, you might get suspicious or even cancel the application. I recalled my interactions with my grandmother. Grandma, she acted so well. Oh, but I was drawn in by the welcome those who conduct thorough investigations line. As I started to say, Sarah chuckled. That's amazing. Your grandmother suggested writing that line, thinking it might attract you. I looked up at the sky in defeat. I was completely outmatched by my grandmother. Despite having spent so little time together, my grandmother saw through everything. Oh, so that's why you praised me for every little thing. It was to build my confidence. When I said that, Sarah blushed slightly. I said I'd handle it, but I didn't really know what to do. I just wanted you to regain your confidence since you seem to have lost it. Like a kind older sister, she praised me no matter what I did. It all made sense now. Feeling resolved, I said, all right. Let's do our best for Nguyen. As I said this, feeling refreshed, Sarah's expression clouded. What should we do? Of course, we'll aim for leniency, but what he did was wrong. Seeing Sarah struggle, I turned to her. How about a plea bargain? Sarah's face lit up for a moment. Although it's not yet common in Japan, it was often used in the US. If we can get information about the fraud ring from Nguyen and capture them. Sarah's expression slowly brightened. Yes, plea bargains are still rare in Japan, but if we can use his information to capture the fraud ring, it could lead to a reduced sentence as part of a cooperation agreement. Sarah's face shone with determination. I can't forgive those who deceived Nguyen either. It would be great if they were caught and Nguyen's sentence was reduced. We had our strategy. A few days later, Nguyen was successfully acquitted. Sarah's skills were impressive, and I played my part well too. We divided our tasks. First, Sarah approached Nguyen about compensating the victims. To Nguyen, $10,000 was a significant amount. However, showing sincerity could lead to a settlement and a lighter sentence. Sarah encouraged Nguyen to contact his family in Vietnam. Initially hesitant, Nguyen was persuaded by Sarah's heartfelt words. How would your family feel if they found out later that you were imprisoned in Japan? And what if they learned they could have prevented it by helping out? I would be devastated. Moved by Sarah's words, Nguyen tearfully contacted his family. His family scrambled to gather money. Although they couldn't collect the full amount, their sincerity reached the victims, leading to a settlement with the condition of paying the remaining amount and even obtaining a petition for a reduced sentence. As for me, I ran around based on the information Nguyen provided. Despite Nguyen's phone being cancelled, I traced his footsteps and found small clues. Based on Nguyen's testimony, the police created a sketch and tracked down the man who had given Nguyen instructions. I visited Nguyen's training site to see if anyone else had received similar proposals. Thanks to these pieces of information, the police successfully busted the fraud ring. Cheers! On the night we secured the dismissal of charges. Sarah and I celebrated at an izakaya. We were both excited and the drinks flowed freely. After a while, Sarah leaned her elbows on the table, her cheeks flushed, and stared at me. Being stared at for a while made me nervous. What is it? Is there something on my face? Sarah shook her head seriously. You should get your lawyer qualification in Japan. The sudden suggestion sobered me up. Why? I managed to ask. Sarah's expression remained unchanged. From this case, I realized you're truly someone who stands by your clients. Her serious gaze made me look away. It's too late for that. Besides, as your paralegal, I can support the clients well enough. Sarah lightly tapped the table. What a waste. Her words struck deep. If you stay as my paralegal, we'll only be able to help one person. But if you become a lawyer, we can help two people together. I looked down. But I don't think I'm cut out to be a lawyer. Hearing this, Sarah furrowed her brow. The main reason I left my career in the US was my shame in not being able to properly support my clients. However, there was another reason. I was exhausted by the intense courtroom battles. especially in the US, where harsh language was often used, and as someone not naturally inclined towards conflict, I had tried to put on a brave face for my clients. But once I left and returned to Japan, I realized that world wasn't for me. Hearing my reasons, Sarah puffed out her cheeks. Coward. With one word, she struck a nerve. If you're like this, you'll never get to date me. Her sudden bombshell made me panic. What? Why? Sarah, still pouting and blushing slightly, replied. I know you like me, don't you? I turned red and stammered. No. It's just. You're drunk, right? That's it. You're drunk, Sarah. At my suggestion, Sarah slowly shook her head. Did you forget who my source is? I pictured my grandmother's smiling face in my mind. I buried my head in my hands. She's told me everything about you, you know? How you're kind, amazing, wonderful, and all that. Living alone with my grandmother could get a bit lonely. Trying to dispel the loneliness, I often talked a lot. But the only topic I really had was Sarah, so I ended up talking about her. As I buried my head in my hands, Sarah continued talking to herself. Beautiful, cute, and I love her. Hey! I didn't say that much to my grandmother. When I protested, Sarah smirked. So you didn't tell your grandmother. But what about in your heart? Her teasing expression was a knockout for me. I do think that. As I admitted honestly, Sarah suddenly blushed bright red. She had been provoking me, but now she was the one who was embarrassed. I didn't think you'd admit it so easily. Sarah covered her cheeks with both hands. So, since you said that much, will you go out with me? When I asked, sounding a bit sulky, Sarah puffed out her chest. If you pass the Japanese bar exam and become a lawyer. Here we go again with that, I thought, but then Sarah gently touched my hand. Because, it would be such a waste. You have a better ability to empathize with people than I do, and you're smarter than me, right? I squeezed Sarah's hand tightly. What? Sarah looked a little flustered, and I leaned in closer. I promise. I'll pass it as soon as possible. And when that time comes, it will be too late to regret it. Then, I brought Sarah's hand closer to me. Can I do something? I think this will give me all the motivation I need. With that, I kissed Sarah's hand. Sarah's ears turned bright red. That expression was incredibly endearing. A few years later, our wedding reception was coming to an end. After reading our letters to our parents, we called my grandmother to the spotlight. My grandmother, not knowing what was happening, was led by the staff to stand before us. I took the microphone. Grandma, thank you for always worrying about me. Hearing this, my grandmother's eyes welled up a bit. And thank you for being like a speaker, relaying everything I told you to Sarah. The whole room erupted in laughter at my words. Grandma looked away and whistled innocently. She's such a playful grandma. But thanks to that, I am now married to Sarah. I also managed to pass the bar exam in Japan. Thank you for making me midnight snacks and supporting me during my studies. Then, Sarah handed over a small package. It was a preserved flower made from the flowers my grandmother grew in her garden, so they wouldn't wilt. It was encased in glass and could be enjoyed for years. Just like the flowers in the garden, please stay healthy and keep watching over us. As I said this, my grandmother nodded with a smile. Sarah and I smiled at each other. I am who I am today thanks to my parents' care, my grandmother's love, and Sarah's encouragement. Now it's my turn to give back. I want to live my life supporting these wonderful people and the clients who come to rely on me. I snapped back to reality when I heard Kevin's shout. Hey! James! Is that true? Being shaken, I managed to answer somehow. It is true, but it's not a big deal. As I was answering, feeling dizzy, a lovely voice echoed. It is a big deal. I turned around to see a beautiful woman in a pantsuit standing there with a slightly puffed cheek. Kevin's eyes widened at the sudden appearance of the beautiful woman. My name is James Parker, 48 years old. Somehow, I feel a bit nervous. Currently, I'm holding a postcard, hesitating a bit before entering the hotel.
The postcard reads, "Notice of the 45th reunion of ABC High School, 30th graduation anniversary." It's an invitation to the high school reunion.
My high school days were tumultuous.
ABC High School was one of the top-ranked schools in the state. Being good at studying, I always maintained top grades even at ABC High School.
I planned to go to college and then start my own business to become a president. Since my father had started a business and served as its president, I was contemplating whether to take over his company or start a new venture. I used to talk about such dreams with my friends. My life plan fell apart in the winter of my sophomore year.
My father failed in his business, leading to bankruptcy. My family ended up with a huge debt. With the debt, I couldn't rely on my parents for college tuition and living expenses.
I was offered a scholarship, but it was just another form of debt. I refused to take on debt like my father had, not wanting both of us to be burdened with huge debts.
Giving up on going to college, I stopped studying.
After all, I would just get a job after graduating from high school. I didn't engage in clear delinquency, but I started skipping school or leaving early.
As my behavior worsened, so did my grades. I didn't care.
If I wasn't going to college, it didn't matter if my grades were bad. At that time, I was in a state of self-destruction.
Those were the days. I thought, chuckling at the memory of my younger self. I'd become old enough to think of it as a youthful indiscretion.
As I was lost in thought, a voice came from behind.
"Are you here for the ABC High School reunion?"
When I turned around, after a moment of silence, the person raised their voice.
"James. Is that you?" Recognizing the voice and expression, I remembered too. "Are you Kevin?"
He nodded vigorously, and we both smiled.
"So nostalgic. How have you been?"
He slapped my back, and I replied with a wry smile.
"I've been well." "You seem well too, Kevin."
Hearing this, Kevin grinned.
"Wow. What's with that suit?" "It's pretty nice." "Weren't you the one who went straight into a job after high school?"
"Yeah, the factory."
"That's a pretty nice suit for a factory guy." I responded with a wry smile. "You remember people's paths pretty well."
Kevin raised his eyebrows in response to my question.
"I remember because it was shocking.
You, the smart one, weren't in the college prep class in our senior year, and everyone made a big fuss. When we realized you'd been missing a lot from the end of our sophomore year, it all made sense. There were quite a few rumors." As he dug into my youthful indiscretions, I scratched my head.
"Well, a lot happened.
I quit the factory job, though." As I started to give an update, Kevin interrupted.
"What? You quit the factory too? Can't stick to anything, huh?" "I've been at the same company since graduating college. You know, staying put has its perks. I'm a manager now, check it out, here's my card."
Looking at the business card, I saw it was from a pretty big company.
"A manager at a major company, huh?"
I said, and Kevin puffed out his chest. "It was tough at first, but perseverance pays off," he said with a proud snort, and I smiled wryly. Just then, a voice came from behind. "Oh, this is nostalgic."
"Kevin, is that you?"
I turned around, and there stood Mr. Anderson.
My high school teacher was standing there. "Wow. Mr. Anderson. It's been a while. Why are you in a lab coat? I thought you retired."
Mr. Anderson, who used to teach biology, always wore a lab coat.
He laughed. "Well, a lab coat is my signature look, you know? A suit doesn't suit me." There was no malice in Mr. Anderson's hearty laugh.
Seeing him in his lab coat brought back more high school memories. Mr. Anderson was the biology teacher for the entire grade and my homeroom teacher in senior year. My high school had college prep classes for humanities and sciences, and a mixed class for those not planning to go to college. In a school where most students aimed for college, my intention to work right after high school was unusual, so my class had few students. Even when he was teaching biology, it was clear that Mr. Anderson was quite unkempt. His lab coat was always rumpled, and his hair was messy. He looked much older than 38 years old at the time.
To me back then, he seemed very lax.
His catchphrase was, "Do as you like."
If I asked to leave early from a boring afternoon class, he'd say, What are you leaving early for? Studying? Not social studies, but math? Okay. Do as you like. I'll mark you absent. If someone aiming to be a public employee suddenly changed their career path, he'd say, "What? Changing to a vocational school? Okay. I'll cancel your next mock exam, do as you like." But in reality, it wasn't lighthearted for Mr. Anderson. He respected the paths students chose and supported them, pushing them forward. I realized this years later. As we reminisced about 30 years ago, we entered the venue, chatting while picking at the food. In the middle of the venue, various dishes were laid out in a buffet style, with round tables placed around the sides. Everyone was chatting at their respective tables. Still wearing his familiar rumpled lab coat, Mr. Anderson listened to Kevin's updates. "A manager, huh? You've worked hard." Kevin answered with a smile. "Thanks to you teachers, I got into my desired college. The career path I've taken wouldn't have been possible with just a high school diploma." "James, if things had gone smoothly, you could have been on the same path as me. No, with your brains, you might have gone even further." Feeling a bit annoyed at his pity, I slightly bristled. Whether knowing my feelings or not, no, Mr. Anderson definitely knew. He signaled Kevin to sit down. "I've got an interesting story for you, so have a seat." Kevin, trusting Mr. Anderson, sat down without any doubt. "An interesting story? What is it?" Kevin asked with a smile, setting his plate on the table and leaning in. "It's about this guy," Mr. Anderson said, pointing at me with a grin. Wondering what story would come out, I nervously took a seat next to Mr. Anderson. After graduating high school, I got a job at a factory. Taking advantage of Mr. Anderson's do-as-you-like attitude, I found a factory job on my own and went for the interview. Since my high school was a top-ranked school, it had very few job recommendation slots. And those were allocated to students more outstanding than me. Having given up on studying from the winter of my sophomore year, my grades in my senior year were terrible. And I wasn't included in the slots that the school confidently recommended. I wasn't keen on job hunting through my high school, and when I reported to Mr. Anderson afterward, he scratched his head and said, "It's amazing you got an offer. I'll report it to the school, so do your best and let me go." I was taken aback. Since not going through the school could lead to issues with wages and working hours, even at a top-ranked school, those wanting to work were advised to go through the school. I expected to get in trouble for ignoring this advice, but there was no punishment at all. I later found out that Mr. Anderson had bowed to the grade leader and confirmed the conditions at the factory for me. Unaware of everything, I felt a bit proud of having found a job on my own, which was childish of me. I was being protected by adults without realizing it. Starting work at the factory left me exhausted every day. I used to attend classes half-heartedly, leave early whenever I felt like it, and skip school on days I didn't feel like going, making up random excuses. Now, suddenly, I started a full-time job where I'm on my feet all day. Of course, it was exhausting. During such times, I would remember Mr. Anderson. If you chose this path, do as you like. But if you chose it, see it through. Even if you change paths midway, see that new path through. These seemingly contradictory words somehow stuck with me. Perhaps because of this, I ran into Mr. Anderson on my way home one evening. "Oh, James. Long time no see. You're working hard, huh?" Seeing me in my work clothes, Mr. Anderson laughed. "Mr. Anderson, what are you doing out this late?" I asked in a casual tone, and he scratched his head and said with a wry smile, "Well, you could call it an evening home visit." Ahead was a police box. ABC High School was a top-ranked school. Students who decided against attending a public university often had various reasons. Those who found a path they loved were fine, but those like me, whose paths were closed for unwilling reasons, could become reckless. I never got into trouble with the law, but some of my classmates did. "You've got it tough too, Mr. Anderson," I said, slightly understanding, and Mr. Anderson laughed heartily. "The day James shows me concern has come, huh?" His words treated me like a child, but his tone was pleased. My chest tightened a bit. "You live alone, right? Do you have time now?" Having left home when I started working, I was living alone in an apartment.
I had planned to just buy some prepared food at the supermarket and have a simple dinner afterward.
Why don't you come to my place? Tell me how you've been, Mr. Anderson said, pulling me along.
When we arrived at his house, his wife served me dinner.
It was stew.
She apologized for it being simple, saying she was glad she had made extra. But to me, it was a warm meal after a long time, and the stew, made without store-bought roux, was exquisite. After eating my fill, the door opened.
Oh, you're back. This is my daughter, Linda. A girl in a school uniform bowed to me.
She had a small face with well-shaped eyes, nose, and mouth.
An incredibly cute girl. Wow, your daughter?
She doesn't look like you at all, Mr. Anderson, I said, and Linda blushed and quickly went to her room.
I felt a bit embarrassed.
Oh, sorry. I said something weird. When I apologized, Mr. Anderson laughed.
No, I hear that a lot.
She takes after her mother.
I'm glad she does. Sometimes people even ask if she's really my child.
When Mr. Anderson laughed heartily, Linda changed into her casual clothes and sat at the table.
I'm definitely your daughter, Linda said, a bit sulky. Watching her, I quickly realized something. Linda adored her father, Mr. Anderson.
She was upset because someone suggested she wasn't his child. It was endearing to see such a reaction from a teenager who should be at an age where they typically find their parents annoying.
I decided to share some stories about Mr. Anderson. Linda laughed heartily at my stories.
Seeing this, Mr. Anderson muttered,
Linda, why don't you have James tutor you?
Both Linda and I were surprised by this suggestion. Touching his chin, Mr. Anderson continued, This is the first time I've seen Linda enjoy talking to one of my former students.
He may have given up on studying, but he's pretty smart. Linda looked down, embarrassed. Currently in her second year of middle school, Linda was struggling with her studies.
She attended cram school after club activities. But her grades weren't improving. Mr. Anderson considered hiring a tutor, but Linda was shy, and he himself wasn't knowledgeable outside of biology, so he was at a loss.
Is your factory job okay with side gigs? I'll pay you. What do you think? Glancing at Linda,
I saw a worried expression. Her desire to improve her grades was clear. If it's okay with you, but I'll need some time to review middle school studies.
At this, Mr. Anderson laughed heartily. James, you're earnest at heart.
His praise made me a bit embarrassed. After that, I started visiting the Anderson household twice a week.
I insisted on being paid in meals instead of money.
Mrs. Anderson readily agreed, but Mr. Anderson still gave me a separate salary.
Linda struggled to understand things at first. Even simple formulas couldn't be memorized unless she fully grasped the reasoning behind them. But once she understood, she showed promise.
I broke down and explained the concepts thoroughly.
Linda's reactions were clear when she truly understood something.
Her eyes sparkled. She was originally a cute girl, but with that expression, she was incredibly charming.
I found myself almost falling for this middle school student.
Sensing this, Mr. Anderson would often enter the room without knocking, preventing any sweet atmosphere.
I also had many conversations with Mr. Anderson. Next week is going to be busy.
I wish I could teach Linda from home.
When I muttered this, Mr. Anderson teased, Why not use video calls? Do you know how much that would cost? I replied, and Mr. Anderson nonchalantly said, Then why don't you create such a system?
That's impossible. To my words, he responded seriously.
Why? Big companies are already using video conferencing. I pouted. That's for big companies. Mr. Anderson didn't back down.
If such a system exists, it will eventually become widespread.
If digital networks become common, the world will change drastically.
We might be able to make video calls with anyone, anywhere in the world.
I furrowed my brows.
For a biology teacher, you sure know a lot.
Mr. Anderson grinned. Always keep your antenna up. You never know what might become a useful hint.
His words struck a chord with me. I once dreamed of starting my own business.
Could I really do it?
Me, who just graduated high school and found a random factory job, living day by day.
It was as if Mr. Anderson read my mind. You're still young, you can become anything. Do what you want when you feel like doing it. If you need anything, I'll support you with all my might.
Those words deeply resonated with me. True to his word, whenever I lost my way, he extended a helping hand and supported me in many ways.
And now, he's the president of a group of 10 companies.
Mr. Anderson said with a smile, addressing Kevin across the round table at the reunion. As Mr. Anderson recounted stories from my high school days, our reunion, and tutoring Linda, a flood of memories washed over me.
I was snapped back to reality by Kevin's shout, "What? President? James?"
He grabbed my shoulders and shook me.
"Hey! James! Is that true?" Being shaken, I managed to answer somehow. It is true, but it's not a big deal." As I was answering, feeling dizzy, a lovely voice echoed, "It is a big deal."
I turned around to see Linda in a pantsuit standing there with a slightly puffed cheek.
"Linda? What's wrong? Did something happen?" Mr. Anderson asked, surprised. Linda sighed. "Dad, you forgot your phone." "Unbelievable. It's a reunion, don't you need to exchange contact information with people?"
Mr. Anderson patted his lab coat pockets.
"Oh, did I forget it? Didn't even notice."
True to his usual self, he rarely used his phone. As I chuckled, Linda turned to me.
"And James, this."
She pointed at my wallet, and I panicked.
"What? No way. Oh, it's really not here."
My wallet was missing from my small bag.
Of course, Linda had it. Mr. Anderson burst into laughter. "Forgot your wallet? I can get by without my phone, but..." I protested. "No. The phone is more important."
I brought the reunion fee in an envelope, and I mostly use mobile payments. In our argument, Linda sighed and said, "Both of you are hopeless," cutting us off, making both Mr. Anderson and me shrink back.
Kevin's voice cut in. "Wait, what?" "Mr. Anderson's daughter." And I proudly put an arm around Linda's shoulders. "This is my wife, Linda." Linda bowed politely. "Nice to meet you.
Thank you for taking care of my father and my husband. I hope they haven't caused you any trouble."
"Dad hasn't been saying anything weird, has he?" Mr. Anderson, resting his elbow on the table, looked a bit sulky. "Why am I the only one?" Linda smiled at him. "James doesn't say weird things, he's kind." Mr. Anderson chuckled.
After about 2 hours, the reunion came to an end.
It was a meaningful time, chatting with Kevin and many other former classmates. As we were leaving, I had a brief conversation with Kevin.
"Kevin, you pitted me for working at a factory with just a high school diploma, but I enjoyed it."
"Sure.
Working at a big company with a high salary is great, but everyone's definition of happiness is different.
Now, even as a president,
I sometimes wish for more free time."
"So, well."
I took a deep breath. "Even if I fail and end up in debt, I'll still enjoy it, so don't pity me,"
I said nonchalantly, and Kevin chuckled. "That's exactly what I'd expect from someone with Mr. Anderson as a father-in-law. You've really grown into someone unfazed by anything." That was the highest compliment for me. "Let's grab a drink sometime. I'd love to hear more about your business,"
he said, and I nodded with a smile. Since we were already here, I rejoined Linda and Mr. Anderson, who were waiting nearby. After chatting with various students and having a few drinks, Mr. Anderson was completely drunk. Muttering in his sleep, he complained about me not calling him father-in-law.
I chuckled. "You're too great for me to call you that." Linda giggled. "Even though he's just a drunk old man."
As she drove, I admired her profile.
Even at 43, she was still beautiful. Noticing my gaze, Linda glanced at me. "Somehow, this reminds me of that day. Back then, you were the one driving."
Her words made me recall that day too. That day was the day Linda got accepted into college. I continued tutoring Linda even after she got into high school, seriously restudying from my sophomore year to teach her, and guided her until she was accepted into college. She had asked me to take her on a celebratory drive if she got into her first choice, a top university. Her first choice was a prestigious university, so I lightly agreed to her request, but she ended up passing, which made me a bit nervous. Why was I nervous? By that time, I had fallen for Linda, and if it weren't for the scenario where Mr. Anderson might interrupt, I might have made a move. Being alone in a car with her was dangerous. But Linda got accepted. So, to fulfill my promise, I took her for a drive with her in the passenger seat. Linda kept looking at me while I drove, making my heart race. Suddenly, she spoke. "James, do you know why I chose to major in economics?" I answered, feeling nervous. "You want to start a business someday, right? You said you were inspired by our talks, so you chose the business department." She smiled. "I don't want to start a business myself." Her answer puzzled me. "I want to support you." I thought about what studies would help me support you as a president, so I chose economics. The light turned red, and the car stopped. My heart was pounding, feeling like it should stay stopped forever. "I love you, James." Her confession made my heart race even faster. "I decided to tell you once I got into college. Even if you don't feel the same, I'll work hard and join your company. Please let me work with you." I couldn't help but start the car as the light turned green and pulled into a nearby supermarket parking lot. Nervous, I failed to park several times, but finally managed to do so and turned off the engine, sweating profusely. Linda, seeing my silence, looked down, not saying a word. The silence was heavy. I didn't know how to start. But my feelings were the same. "I love you too." Hearing my words, Linda's eyes widened. She looked incredulous. "Well, it's usually the other way around, someone as cute and honest as you, why me?" I caused Mr. Anderson so much trouble in school. Took a random job at a factory, and now I'm trying to start a business, and who knows if it would succeed. Linda shook her head firmly. "My father always talked about you. He said it was such a waste that you had dreams but had them crushed by your family's circumstances. That you had the strength to climb back up but had given up, yet your eyes still showed him were struggling. He wanted you to be the happiest. He has many students, and he often talks about them, but I quickly realized something. The person he wanted to be the happiest was you, James." Tears naturally fell from my eyes. "The moment I met you, I also wanted you to be the happiest. And during the time you tutored me, I fell in love with you as a man. When I couldn't understand something and my teacher would just tell me to memorize the formula, you broke it down and explained it to me. No matter how long it took me to understand, you never looked at me with disappointment. I fell more and more in love with you for patiently teaching me until I understood." Linda's eyes were brimming with tears. "I don't just want you to be happy. I want to be the one to make you happy. It might be presumptuous of me, but..." She clenched her fists on her lap. I covered her hands with mine. "Thank you for seeing me for who I am." Linda giggled. "Are you saying that to me, or to my father?" I looked straight at her. "Of course, to you, Linda." When I said that, she leaned in for a kiss, and I panicked. "Wait. No, no. That's why I parked at a supermarket, because it's bright and we won't get carried away. We need Mr. Anderson's permission first." I rambled on, and Linda pouted. "It's so mean to call it getting carried away. I've always wanted to." I cut her off before she could say something too sweet. "Anyway, I love you, but let's take it slow." She turned forward in her seat, still pouting. "Fine. I understand." Her sulky tone made me desperate. "I just want to cherish you. Is that okay?" When I glanced at her, her pout softened a bit. "Then, please cherish me." I felt relieved and smiled at her. "Until we get married, no funny business." It was a relief that came too soon. "That's a bit, can you cut me some slack on that?" I hurriedly bowed my head. In that moment, our relationship was cemented. No matter how old I get, Linda always has the upper hand. I smiled at her profile as she drove, the opposite of that day. Linda kept her eyes on the road but smiled. "Mr. Parker? Your online meeting starts in 10 minutes, right?" Her words made me panic. I had asked to move the meeting to tomorrow because of the reunion, but they insisted on today, so it was scheduled for tonight. As I opened my laptop, I groaned. Still, the world really turned out just like Mr. Anderson said. I glanced at Mr. Anderson, who was snoring in the back seat, and spoke to Linda. It's one of my father's many predictions, but this one hit the mark. Linda had always enjoyed discussing the future with Mr. Anderson. Among their discussions were things like time machines and everyone flying. Flying might actually come true someday. Linda laughed. If that happens, let's fly together with the kids. I smiled too. In every future Linda imagined, I and our children were always there. I should be more grateful for being included in that future as if it were the most natural thing. I love you, Linda, I said, and she blushed. At the same moment, Mr. Anderson made a strange sound from the back seat. I was a bit flustered but looked at Linda with affection. A reunion and a night drive. Today was a day filled with many memories from the past. There were many struggles and setbacks along the way, but all those days are treasures. In my heart, I silently thank the greatest treasure sitting in the driver's seat and the best mentor lying in the back seat. My name is Tom. I'm a typical office worker, turning 30 this year. I just do the tasks assigned to me. I don't excel at anything in particular. I'm the youngest of 3 brothers, but my 2 older brothers are quite exceptional. The oldest is a lawyer, and the second is a doctor. As for me, no matter how hard I tried in school or sports, I was always average. I tried desperately to catch up with my brothers but never could. My parents would tell me, "You have your own strengths, so it's okay." But I couldn't help but notice that I'm being compared to my brothers by teachers and others, leading to a massive inferiority complex. With that in mind, I know I wouldn't be able to aim high at work, so I just perform my duties to avoid being a burden to the company. I finish my assigned work within working hours, and after hours, I voluntarily do tasks like filing and restocking supplies. That's about all I can contribute. I try not to stand out and just do what's required. Living quietly in my current position suits me. Evidently, my immediate superior now is a younger employee who joined the company after me. He's already been promoted to supervisor, leaping over me. Even my junior colleagues are surpassing me. The major tasks are assigned to the capable younger employees. I only get the leftover, insignificant ones. I'm pretty much sidelined. I have to admit that myself. I try not to be a nuisance, but being an older failure must be annoying. Even though I work quietly at my desk, there's someone who greets me without discrimination. That's Emily Johnson, who works in the same department. She's bright, has big eyes, and her dimples are cute when she smiles. She's popular among the male employees, is a colleague of the supervisor, and at 28, younger than me. She's very competent and handles many large projects. Despite all that, she treats everyone, including me, equally. What I admire about her is that she says thank you more often than sorry. Just this morning, she came to me and said, "You put together the materials yesterday, right?" Thanks, that really helped. Everyone admires her sincerity, but there's one person who glares at this. That's the supervisor, Ken. There's a rumor that he's interested in her. He often works with her and takes her along on business trips. I have no interest in other people's love lives, but his obvious behavior is pretty clear to see. Because of that, he doesn't like it when Emily talks to male employees. Even if it's just about work, he glares at her for talking so amicably. Especially if she talks to someone like me, a low-level employee, with a smile, his face becomes too scary to even look at. Just the other day, after a brief chat, he said, "What were you talking about?" There's no reason for her to talk to someone like you. By the way, he used to call me Tom before he became a supervisor, but now it's just someone like you. Well, I suppose I deserve that, given how much I've fallen. When Ken asked what we were talking about, I honestly said, "She just asked about the materials I put together." But he responded, "There's no way she would talk to someone like you. Don't get any ideas," and left with a click of his tongue. I do think Emily is beautiful, but I respect her for her work. I'm not interested in her in that way, but I couldn't tell him that directly. Probably because she had been talking to me recently, it must have annoyed him. Since then, Ken seems to have targeted me, making me help with his tasks, leaving me with no free time.
Because I was working on the supervisor's orders, I even got rare overtime pay. Still, I thought I should at least do some simple filing, so I worked on some tasks out of his sight. One of the documents I had filed turned out to be something Emily needed. She approached me and said, "Thanks for the supplementary note yesterday. You always help with the little things." Unfortunately, Ken saw this and said, "Don't get close with Emily. You're useless and make my eyes sore." He must have been really upset, because from that day on, he started calling me out in front of everyone and scolding me for mistakes. If they were my mistakes, I would have no objections, but they were clearly his errors, and he yelled at me as if they were mine. It's pathetic, really. I should just say, "Those were your mistakes, Ken," but I can't defy my superior. After a month of this, my stomach started to ache from the stress. The yelling kept escalating, becoming more and more unreasonable. Ken seemed intent on showing Emily and everyone else how incompetent I was, but honestly, I had reached my limit. One day, as usual, he yelled at me in front of everyone, "You're always making mistakes. Just quit already." Something snapped inside me, and I thought I couldn't go on like this anymore. So, I said, "Okay, I'll quit." The office fell silent. I was about to leave when something unexpected happened. A voice from behind said, "That's not right. Do you know who keeps your work running smoothly?" It was Emily. She continued, "And most of those mistakes are yours, right? It's despicable to blame others for your own errors." Emily, who always spoke politely to Ken as her superior, was now obviously angry. She, usually composed, openly displayed her anger. Ken, who had been trying to make everyone, especially her, seeming as incompetent, was stunned into silence. Emily said, "Tom is great at organizing documents and adds notes so others don't have to search for information. He always anticipates and handles the small tasks, but Ken, you're not paying any attention to your subordinates, are you? Even we can see this. So maybe you should cool off for a bit." After that, she went back to her work. Everyone was surprised by her outburst, but when they made eye contact with me, they smiled and nodded knowingly. Did I just get praised? Embarrassed by my own thoughts, I went back to my desk. After that, Ken stopped giving me tasks and looked dejected. The next day, he didn't assign me any work or talk to me at all. Suddenly, I had too much free time. So, I decided to focus on my own tasks. I aimed to finish everything by the end of the day and got to work on my computer. Just then, Emily called out to me. "Tom, could you join my project team? I've got the supervisor's approval." I was momentarily stunned, not understanding what was being said. Project teams are usually for top employees, so I never expected to be called upon. I asked her several times to confirm, but it seemed there was no mistake. I wondered why me, but since the supervisor had approved it, I had no choice but to accept. Following her to the meeting room, I glanced at Ken, who was glaring at me. However, he didn't say anything anymore. From that day, my life changed completely. The project was the company's top priority, and the tasks were incomparable to what I had done before. As a lower-level employee, all I could do was follow Emily's instructions. Surprisingly, it suited me well. The long-term nature of the project required intense teamwork, and through this, my skills visibly improved. I was surprised to realize it myself, but my innate attention to detail seemed to work in my favor. While working hard on significant tasks, this naturally developed into a valuable skill. The executives even said, "We underestimated your abilities. Your attention to detail is invaluable." This boosted my confidence. Since then, I started getting assigned more team-based tasks. People began inviting me to join their projects, and I worked more frequently with Emily. I used to be filled with inferiority, but receiving praise and recognition significantly boosted my confidence. Now, I find work incredibly enjoyable. Even my colleagues started saying, "You're becoming more reliable." Around that time, I started spending more time with Emily outside of work. We found out we lived close to each other, so we often had dinner together after work and spent weekends together. As we spent more time together privately, I realized I had developed feelings for her. One day, after a date, I gathered my courage and confessed my feelings to her. However, I was rejected. "I appreciate your feelings, but I have a hard time with men." She looked down as she said this. I had hoped for a better response,
and the rejection was a shock I couldn't hide. But what puzzled me was the way she refused. "I like you, but I'm sorry." She said this at the end. Maybe it was my imagination, but it felt like she had feelings for me as well. That's why the rejection didn't make sense. I expected things to get awkward, but she continued to treat me the same way at work. Even though I still liked her, I was content just working together. I felt awkward inviting her for dinner alone, but then she invited me instead. We went to our usual place after work. That day, despite seeming cheerful at work, she looked a bit down during dinner. On the way home, she stopped walking. Sensing something was off, I asked, "What's wrong?" She remained silent for a while, then looked at me with teary eyes. I tried to give up, but I can't. "I like you too." Her lips were trembling. It seemed she had more to say but couldn't find the words. "Can we sit and talk?" She nodded. We sat on a bench in a nearby park. After calming down, she began to speak slowly. "Have you ever wondered why I always wear long sleeves, even in summer?" Emily asked cautiously. I recalled that she always wore long sleeves and never wore skirts, only pants. I had just assumed she was sensitive to the cold, considering the office was air-conditioned. When I expressed my assumption, she smiled but quickly returned to a serious expression. "You see, I can't show my skin. I hide it because I don't want anyone to see it. Normally, it's fine because I can keep it covered. But if I were in a relationship, I couldn't keep it hidden. That's why I'm scared to date men." Her trembling voice conveyed her deep feelings, and I could tell she was forcing herself to talk. "I have big scars on my arms and legs. From a car accident when I was a child." She then shared the details. She was hit by a truck at an unmarked crosswalk when she was in first grade. She suffered severe injuries and had no consciousness after hitting her head. Fortunately, a nurse witnessed the accident. Thanks to her immediate first aid, her life was saved. Despite the severe injuries, her recovery was smooth, thanks to that nurse. The hospital where I was taken happened to be where that nurse worked, and she would often check on me until I was discharged. Sorry for the irrelevant details. Anyway, the scars from that accident are terrible. But you're the first person I've ever told this to. Listening to Emily, I didn't know how to respond, but I shared my honest feelings. I can't lightly say that it doesn't matter, considering how you feel, but thank you for telling me. Tears welled up in her eyes. Understanding how much courage it took for her to share this, I felt a tightness in my chest. We both realized that our feelings were mutual, and she said her feelings hadn't changed. When I suggested we take our time building our relationship, she nodded and said, "Yes." And so, we started dating. This newfound relationship motivated me even more at work, and I was enjoying my life. However, as I continued dating Emily, a vague memory kept coming back to me and nagging at my mind. It was about Emily's accident. I didn't want to touch on her emotional scars, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Hey, you might not want to remember this, but..." I began the conversation. "At the time of the accident, were you wearing pigtails?" Emily looked puzzled. "Yeah, I used to wear high pigtails back then." "Why?" She seemed surprised, and I was equally astonished. "No way. Was the accident in front of the big slide at the park in the neighboring town?" Her eyes widened further. "Yes, it was." "How do you know that?" My heart skipped a beat. "I think I might have been there during your accident." Her eyes widened in shock. Hearing her story about the accident, I realized our hometowns were close. And the details about being hit by a truck and a nurse providing first aid had been bothering me. That day, I was with my mom, riding our bikes to the nearby supermarket. On the way back, we witnessed a car accident. My mom immediately stopped her bike and ran over. As a nurse, she quickly provided first aid and called an ambulance. Then, she called my grandma, who was at home, to come take care of me. And she rode with the injured child in the ambulance. Considering the age difference between Emily and me, the timeline matched perfectly with her story. I asked, and it turned out that the hospital Emily was admitted to was the same one where my mom worked. "So, the person who helped me was your mom?" We were both overwhelmed with excitement. "Let's call my mom," I said, fumbling with my phone. I explained the situation to my mom. She vividly remembered the event and was so surprised that her words became incoherent. What? Emily? Of course, I remember her. We took a deep breath and calmed down, then handed the phone to Emily. She thanked my mom, who said, "It was my pleasure. Besides, you're taking care of my son now. Please come visit us sometime." A few weeks later, when the busy period at work was over, I took Emily to my parents' house. As soon as my mom saw her, she hugged her tightly and said, "You've grown up so wonderfully." With tears in her eyes. Emily once again expressed her gratitude, but my mom, smiling broadly, said that seeing her healthy was all that mattered. It's amazing how things turn out, isn't it? My mom, surprised but smiling, said it was truly an astonishing coincidence. Emily brought a gift of my mom's favorite pastries, which delighted her. Her parents also spoke with my mom on the phone, making it a day of joyful reunions. However, there was also an embarrassing moment. As they reminisced, Emily said, "You used to visit my hospital room often after work. The stories you told me about your son were about Tom, right?" Hearing this, my mom covered her mouth and said, "Oh." Emily then smiled and said to me, "I heard about your mischievous acts and how you were quite the mama's boy." My mom started laughing. "Mom, come on," I said in a panic, while they laughed heartily. Although it was an embarrassing moment, it was also a happy one. Having someone important to me nearby and healthy made me feel truly happy. That alone was enough to make me feel blessed. There was another thing that made me happy. On the day Emily and my mom reunited, they exchanged contact information while I was out of the room. I found out about this later. One day, Emily suddenly said, "I was talking to your mom." I was taken aback and asked, "Wait, when did you talk to her?" We had only visited my mom that one time. Apparently, they had already become close friends. They occasionally emailed each other, chatting like girlfriends, not just about me. Emily confided in my mom about her insecurities regarding her scars. She told me how much my mom's words meant to her. "Those scars are proof that you fought hard to live. The pain from those scars and your current emotional pain are different. But you've endured and thrived despite your struggles." Who would laugh at such scars? If it was me, I'd gently touch them and say, "I'm so proud of you. I wish I could heal your emotional wounds too. I'm sure Tom feels the same way." She said those words made her very happy. Whenever she had confided in someone about her scars before, they would just tell her not to worry about it. But my mom said something that made her feel warm inside. Emily continued, "When I confided in you, you didn't just tell me not to worry about it, you accepted my feelings. That made me happy. Thank you." She held my hand as she said this. Since then, although she still wears long sleeves, she has been able to roll up her sleeves a bit. While she doesn't feel the need to show her scars to everyone, the fear of being seen has lessened. Proof that I've fought hard to live. Those words have become a source of strength for her. Her smile seems even brighter now. I vowed to protect that smile for the rest of my life.